sweet friends, and welcome back to the Quilters Candy Shop, where you will find sweet treats for the discerning quilter. Today we're going to make another jelly roll weekender quilt called Skyline, using a delightfully late summer and early fall print line from Poppie Cotton called Moonbeam Dreams. This pattern is fast and easy and great for beginners. The directions are simple, and it's all straight line sewing with minimal cutting and no matching seams. Let's get started. The trick of this pattern is picking the right jelly roll. You want to look at the ends of your jelly rolls to see if there's one that has a distinction between the lights and the darks. In this pattern, you need half of your strips to be lights and half of your strips to be darks for the design to take effect. Let's take a look at these examples. This one here, you can see there is not much difference in value. So most of these are all medium, and you will not get the effect you're looking for. This one definitely has some darker prints, and if this jelly roll were stacked from dark to light, you would be able to have a better sense of how many lights and darks. But you can see here, there's just a couple of darks in the blue. All the rest of it is medium, and there's one or two darks in the red. So this also will not have enough. This one, however, there is a clean distinction between the lights and the darks. You can usually get a pretty good idea from looking at the end, but you'll really have to lay them out and see what will work. The jelly roll we'll be using is called Moonbeam Dreams by Amanda Grace for Poppie Cotton. I love this line. It's so sophisticated. The colors are mature and the prints are modern. It's like walking through the Garden of Eden at midnight. As usual, we're going to start by separating the lights from the darks. Now, I'm really lucky. This jelly roll pretty much comes pre-separated. I'm just going to take a better look at what we've got here. Now, don't be fooled by color. A lot of times there's pieces that will look dark, but really read light, like this one, or look light because of the color family, but will actually read as dark. One way to know for sure is to use the camera in your phone and take a picture of your strips while they're lying next to each other, like this. Once you have the picture, you can change it to monochrome or black and white. And that will give you a real exact, true sense of what the value of each piece is. So we can see here that all of these read light. Even this one that has a little darker shade, it's still going to read light. And all of these read light, even this one, even though it's more of a medium, but it's going to fit more in that light category. All of these that are mediums also read a little bit on the light side, except for this one. This one definitely reads as dark. And of course, all of these do read dark. I'm going to shuffle these around a little bit, and then we'll look and see what we have. So I have all the ones that read dark in this pile and all the ones that read light in this pile. Once your strips are separated, you need to count them to see if you have enough. We need 20 darks and 20 lights. I can see already there's far more lights in this pile than there are darks. So let's see what we've got. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14 darks and 28 lights. But that's fine. There's a couple ways that you can cure this. You can always buy 2 jelly rolls to get exactly the prints that you want in exactly the right value. You can also just buy a couple of coordinating fat quarters in the darks and cut those up to fill in the difference. Or you can go to your stash to find something that will work. And that's what I did. I need 6 strips in order to make this count of 14 into 20. I went to my stash and I found these two prints that I think work beautifully. They match the teal in this group nicely, and since there's only this one light teal, it will help spread this color throughout the quilt. So I need 6 more strips and I'm only using 2 prints, so I just cut 3 of each. Now I need to take out 8 strips of the lights, which is no problem. I'm going to take out the most medium ones, which for me was these yellows and also these 2 pinks that read quite medium. So I'm going to take those out. And that makes this all read light. And these will work perfectly for binding, or I can put them in my stash or scrap bins. Okay, let's get on to cutting. Now here's the most important detail of this pattern. You must be able to get 5 8.5-inch rectangles out of each strip. That means you need 42.5 inches between selvages of usable print. Randomly take and open up a few of your strips from the jelly roll and just measure to make sure you've got 42.5 inches usable space. So take a measure from one end to the other and look, we've got plenty. This has 43 inches of print, so I won't have to be near as careful as we did on some of our previous projects. I still recommend that you cut your strips in single layers and start from this printed edge in case you need to steal back some of this fabric. Once you get a good feel for how much room you have to work with, you can layer multiple single layered strips to speed up the cutting, but only do that if you feel confident in your cutting. Once you have your strips lined up nice and tidy, then you want to get a good clean first cut on the end. So I always use the 2 ruler method. Start by using your larger ruler along here. The longer this line, the more straight and perpendicular this cut is going to be. So I'm going to put it right up to that printed selvage line and use a second ruler right here to mark my space. Pull the other ruler aside and cut. This is the most accurate way to get a good first cut off of your piece. Now I'll use the 8.5-inch mark right here and a good solid line across the bottom and line everything up for 8.5 inches. Be sure and check it twice. Don't get distracted. There's no room for error in this pattern. So you have to get 5 rectangles, 8.5 inch, out of all of your strips. Make sure you keep your strips nice and tidy and straight. There you go. Do a little bit of micromanagement there. And then here we go, 8.5. That's 3. 8.5. That's 4. And if I did everything properly, I should have 8.5 right here. And look at that, 8.5 and a little skosh to spare that's mostly selvage edge. Okay, so go ahead and cut all your strips. Make 2 stacks. Make a lights pile and a darks pile. And when you have those cut, we'll start sewing. Here we have our 2 piles of 2.5 by 8.5 inch rectangles, a light stack and a dark stack. There are 100 pieces in each of these piles. The first thing we're going to do is pull a random 25 pieces from the lights pile and set them aside. So you can just go through these, pick out the pieces that you want to pull, and set them aside. You can mix and match these, or they can be all similar in color or print. That's up to you. I pulled 25 from the pinks because there's twice as many of those than there are of the other colors. So this is my 25 I'm going to set aside here. The first part of the assembly process is super simple. From the rest of the 2 piles, you will create 25 strip sets by putting 7 pieces together end to end, alternating lights and darks. You will need 4 dark strips and you will need 3 light strips. You will always start with a dark piece and end with a dark piece because you have 4 of these and only 3 of these. Here's a really fast and easy way to get this done. Go through your darks and pull a random 25 from your dark set as well, and just temporarily set these aside. I've already done that with this pile, and as you can see, it's a mix and match of all the different fabrics. From the remaining pieces in the stack, you should be able to make 75 pairs. That's 1 light and 1 dark. Do the entire stack. Then you can take and put those pair sets together, end to end, like this. Make 25 sets of 4. Once you have 25 sets of 4, add the remaining 25 pairs to the end, like this. Now you should have 25 sets of 6 prints. Now we go to that temporary pile of 25 pieces and grab a dark and add it on to the end where the light print is. So your 7-piece strip set will start and end with a dark print. You should be able to make 25 7-piece strip sets. Well, that's what I'm going to go do, and when I'm done, we'll meet back here and we'll go on to the next step. Here I have my 7-piece strip sets, and there are 25. Once you have your strip sets completed, it's time to get your layout plan so you can mix up the prints and spread out the colors. 2 things to note. First, as you can see, I opted to coordinate my lights versus mixing them up. I'm trying a little experiment with this pattern. The pattern shows scrappy light sections where all 3 of these colors would be mixed up. But because of this particular jelly roll, I'm going to keep my colors together just to see how it looks. But you can do whatever you like best. Secondly, I usually use my bed to do the layout, but at the time of this filming, my husband is sleeping in it. So I'm going to make my little table right here work, and it'll come out just fine. Now, on to the next step. And this is where the real magic happens. Remember those lights we set aside in the beginning? This is where they come into play. We're going to create a chevron effect by splitting the remaining lights and adding a piece at the top and bottom of each strip in a stair-step-like pattern. Cutting these pieces in 2 is going to create the effect. You will need to cut the remaining 25 light strips in the following increments. First, you need 7 8.5-inch strips. So basically you can count out 7 and set those aside. 1, 2, 6, 7. So these are finished as is. You will need 6 6.5-inch strips. I'm going to cut this. I love this 4 by 8-inch ruler. It is so handy. So I'm going to put my end mark at 6.5, line up the bottom, and cut. Now, don't get rid of this leftover. We're going to need that. So I'm going to put both pieces over here, like this. And you will need 6 4.5-inch pieces. So put the 4.5 on the end, line up the bottom, trim, and keep this leftover and keep them separated so you know which is your accurate measured pieces and which are your leftovers. And the last 6 will be 2.5-inch. I'm lining up the 2.5 and cut. Make it nice and straight. And here we have them. 7 8.5-inch by 2.5, 6 6.5 by 2.5, 6 4.5 by 2.5, and 6 2.5 square. These are the leftover ends. Just leave these here for now. These are going to get sewn on the very top end of our strips, and these are going to get sewn on the bottom end of our strips. The first strip will get no piece on the end. The second strip gets one of these, the third strip, the fourth, and the fifth strip gets a full piece. And then back the other direction. The sixth, the seventh, the eighth, and the ninth piece will be a full strip again. When you're done, it'll be obvious where these go. They're going to be in the same strip on the opposite end, and it'll even out the bottom. Now, for those of you mathematicians out there, yes, these are going to be a 1/2 inch short, but no worries. We are going to take and trim the bottom edge so it'll line up perfectly. Okay, I'm going to show you a couple pieces and then we'll get the whole thing put together. Just as a side note, if you're more of a precision quilter, then you have a couple of options if you don't like the idea of trimming the bottom of your quilt because you think it won't make the two ends even. And that's fine. I understand that. If your jelly roll had 42 strips, or your lights and darks came out in uneven, or you have coordinating lights that you can add to the group, you can cut your 2.5 out of this piece, your 4.5 out of this piece, and then use one of your extra strips or some of your stash to cut your 6.5-inch pieces. And then they're going to match up exactly. But as I'm trying to make the best use of the fabric, I'm going to do mine this way, but you can do yours however you like. Now, here are the first 5 strips of my quilt. This is the top and this is the bottom. The very first strip gets nothing added to the top. The next strip gets a 2.5-inch piece added on here. The next piece gets a 4.5-inch. The next piece gets a 6.5-inch piece. And the last one gets a full 8.5-inch strip. And now you can start to see the chevron taking shape. I've got the top end already sewn all together, so now I'm going to add the pieces at the bottom end. So of course, this one needs a full piece. And then be sure to take from your leftover pile and not your measured pile. Your leftover pile goes at the bottom for the 6.5, the 4.5, and the 2.5. And of course, as you remember, these are not exact. We're going to sew all these on, and then I'm going to come back and show you what we're going to do next. So here I have my bottom pieces all sewn on, and this is what the end of your strip is going to look like. These 3 are going to be a 1/2 inch shorter than the 2 outside pieces because these have an extra seam allowance. So at this point, you can just trim these 2 a 1/2 inch shorter, and then you'll be able to match the ends when you go to sew these rows all together. Once you have your ends trimmed, you're going to sew all these together and make a panel. Take one row and flip it over, line up both ends, and then find the middle and pin. I recommend pinning. Even if you don't like to pin, there's no intersections, so there's no seams to match. So you can just sew this willy-nilly, but I like to put a pin in here so I remember which side of the strip to sew on, because if you sew on the wrong side, then you are going to not get the chevron and your strips will be in the wrong order. So I'm going to take this one and this one and flip it over and stick in a single pin so I remember which side I need to sew on, and then I'll match up the two ends and sew my seam. Okay, here you can see I have my 4 rows together, and I am not going to sew my 5th row on because I'm going to take this set of 4 rows and mark it A. I'm going to do that at the top so I know which end is the top, because remember, both ends look exactly the same. So now I have my first set of rows marked A, and I'm just going to set these aside. And then this row is going to slide all the way down, and it's going to be my marker. So I know what is going to get sewn on the top of my next set of strips. So here's the next 4 strips, and this is going to complete 1 chevron. So this one is starting with a full strip. So this is 8, so we need a 6. Now remember, the precisely measured one goes on the top. The next one is going to be a 4, and the next one is a 2, and then the last one is another full strip. So I'm going to sew these pieces onto here, and I'm going to sew the pieces on the end. Okay, here's the second set of strips that makes the other half of the chevron. Of course, I started by lining up the strips at the top with the pieces that were perfectly measured. Those are all lined up evenly. Then I came down to the bottom strips and make sure these are lined up. Now remember, the first time both this piece and this piece were long, but this is the strip from the first set. So now we just can make sure all of these line up with this one. All I have left to do is trim this one right here. I can just line these up, cut it off. Now I'm going to do the same thing as before. I'm going to pair these two, and I'm going to leave this strip set as my gauge for the next set of strips. I'll label this panel B, and I'll keep moving that way across through all 25 of my strips. And here are the last of my strip sets. I've labeled this one E and this one F. Now the very last strip set is going to have 5 because that last strip that we kept moving forward as a gauge for the next set of strips is actually got to have a home, so it's going to get sewn onto the very last panel F. Now I'm going to sew these 2 panels together. I'm going to just flip this one over, and just like the strips, I'm going to match up the ends, find the center, and sew. You'll do that with all your panels until you have one piece and your top is complete. And here's how my Skyline quilt turned out. I love it. Look at these cute chevrons. The vertical lines make it so pretty and tall and modern, and I just love the colors together. I'm going to keep this modern and not add any borders, but if you wanted to add borders to increase the size, it would look great. The Moonbeam Dreams 2.5-inch Rolo is available at our shop at thequilterscandyshop.com. That's SHOPPE shop.com. And because you watched all the way to the end of this video, you can use the discount code MOONBEAM to take 5% off your purchases until the end of the year. Please tell a friend about our channel. We're trying to get to 5,000 subscribers by the end of the year. So don't you forget to like and subscribe so you know the next time we post a fun project like this. And stay tuned for more quilts and crafts, tips and tricks, and a lot of sweet treats. Now, go sew something sweet. Bye!